LLMs get things wrong and sometimes even outright lie. These are called hallucinations, and in this video, we're going to cover what they are, why they happen, and what you can do about it. My name is Timothy Heinem. I am the CEO and co-founder of 7 Sigma. We're an AI studio where we're building AI tools, we're building AI-based MVPs and software products for clients, and even doing some things for ourselves. So, going into it straight away, we'll start with what is a hallucination, why, and as I said, how do we prevent them? So, getting into it. To start with, what is a hallucination? Well, my definition is when an LLM generates plausible sounding but factually false information. What are some examples and what does that mean? Well, for example, it might do something like create a fake citation. For example, according to the 2017 study by Dr. Jones in Nature Medicine. If this is fake, you might not know because it looks real. For example, it might fabricate stats such as Timothy Heinem is 6 foot and 3 inches tall. I'm not. I am 6 foot tall. And so it might fake and say, I'm that big when actually I'm not. It might do something like create non-existent product details, such as the iPhone 17 having a holographic projection display. Maybe it will, probably it won't. It might also introduce things like historical inaccuracies, such as Einstein winning the Nobel Prize for his theory of relativity. According to Einstein, just here, I hope you like my drawing, he actually won it for the photoelectric effect, not for the theory of relativity. And so, ta-da! I think you get the idea, right? For example, in the USA, you can legally drive at 17 without a driver's license if you are with an adult. Not true. However, the LLM might come back and say something like that. And the interesting question is why? Now, so why do they occur? So I've already done another video on this that you can check out, where I talk about LLMs and how they are produced and how they're built. But in essence, the key thing to understand is that they are making a prediction based on probability and not the truth. So they're not generating facts. What they're doing is they're trained on a load of data based on articles, based on books, based on any kind of text it can find. And then it says, okay, if I need to write a sentence, what is likely the first word going to be? And then what's the next word going to be? And the next word and the next word. It doesn't actually do it by words. It breaks words down into what it calls tokens. But in essence, you can kind of think of them as words. And then what it might do when you understand that is you might end up mixing up similar phrases or facts, and which could produce a fake result. And the reason for this is there is not a real memory of facts. And this is a very important thing to understand. What an LLM is doing is it's not, you don't ask your question, it goes away, it's checking all of its training data, finding the correct piece of information and returning it to you. That is not what an LLM or large language model is doing. And obviously examples of these are OpenAI's ChatGPT. This is Claude by Anthropic. This is Grok by XAI. This is Gemini by Google. All of these are using the same underlying technology called LLMs in order to predict what the correct answer is to what you're saying. And if we look at our previous examples, all of these sound like they could be correct, right? According to the study by 2017 by Dr. Jones in Nature Medicine, it sounds like something plausible, right? However, while it's plausible sounding, it is still factually false. And what it's doing is trying to predict what is going to be true based on its training data. And so it's not creating a true fact, it's just creating a sentence that sounds to be true. Now, in its training data, there might be a lot of patterns. So it might say in its training data, if Timothy Heinem is very prevalent on the internet, and there's a lot of information that says Timothy Heinem is 6 foot tall, if that's all over the internet, imagine I go viral and it's looking for that information, it might go, oh, probably the correct sentence here is Timothy Heinem is 6 feet tall. That might actually be how it comes together because there's a lot of information. So these tools can be correct, but they're not being correct because they're pulling a specific fact. They might be correct because probabilistically it's thinking what is the next correct word in the sentence. And so a key thing to understand here is hallucinations are not glitches. They're not the AI making a mistake. Actually, they are a consequence of how the overall LLM is designed. Because it's thinking about probabilities, not about factual correctness, what it's doing is it's saying, what is the most probabilistically correct next word or next token? And then it's producing that output. And that might be producing something that is factually incorrect. So that naturally leads to the next point, which is how do you prevent a hallucination, right? This is obviously the money question. And then there's a few ways to do it. First is you can focus on retrieval instead of focusing on having the AI generate or invent information. So for example, a lot of these tools now have things like web search. So what it will do is you say, what is the current stock price of X? And what it's going to go do is it's going to go and do research and say, okay. It's going to, for example, search for stock price of XYZ company. It gets a response that says, okay, so it's $72, for example. And because it says, okay, the answer is $72, that now goes into its context. And then based on that information, it writes you a response. And because it's already gone and checked the information, it's going to say, it's $72 because I checked on this website and this is the current price, for example. So if you do retrieval either through web search or by you providing the source information yourself, that's going to allow it to be more accurate. What is an example of providing your own source information? For example, let's say I have done my own scientific study, let's say. Maybe I've done a bit of research and I have my data. So what's going to happen is I'm going to provide this to the LLM, and the LLM is then going to use this information to write me a response. What could happen, though, is if I have too many questions and conversations back and forth with the LLM, let's say ChatGPT, what might start to happen, and you've probably seen this happen in earlier versions of these tools, is when the conversation back and forth exceeds the context window of what they're able to do. And you can kind of think of context as maybe almost like a short-term memory. So what happens is every time I send my message back to the LLM, right? So, I'm talking to ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, and I say, great, now can you turn this into an email for me? What it's going to do is it's going to take all of the pre-existing messages that have been sent up to this point, use that as an understanding to say, okay, what is probabilistically the next correct word in the response? Actually token, but we'll keep using the term word. So it's going to start putting together the response by going word, 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 word. And that's how it then produces your response. However, what can happen is if your context, if the amount of conversation back and forth exceeds the amount of short-term memory the AI or the LLM has, it's going to start summarizing your information. And as it starts to summarize what you're doing in order to make sure the amount of text is less than its amount of memory, what's going to end up happening is it might remove in its summary some of the information that you need, which can then reintroduce hallucinations. Because now, for example, if you are asking, what is the key result of this thing, they say of my research finding that I need to put into my report to my investors or into my presentation that I'm producing or whatever else, what it might do is it might actually no longer have that fact, and it might just try and infer it or somewhat make it up based on all the other data it has actually still got from its previous conversation that you've been having. And so then it might hallucinate and might give you a false piece of information, which maybe you notice and maybe you don't. And so all of these things coming together hopefully make you understand where and how the LLM can end up making up fake information. And so if you can be providing the information, so long as it doesn't become too much, if you provide it too much information, it might have to summarize it itself anyway from the beginning. Or if it can just go and search the web, find out the answer to your question, and then give it to you. This is going to be one of the ways that you can prevent the LLM from hallucinating. Another example is if you ask it to self-check. And actually, this is what a lot of AI agents do, which we'll come to. But effectively, if you ask the AI to generate whatever it is you need, and then to self-review. So for example, you might say, can you please write me a detailed list of specifications about the new iPhone? And it might start doing that, and it will start writing out your list of specifications. But then you might say, can you please double check this? And it might say, I noticed a mistake and I've corrected it. Or you might say, I don't think this is true. Can you please double check? And it might say, you're right. Da 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 da. So it might catch errors, but it is a big might because it is subject to the same limitations as all LLMs, is that it's not thinking and it doesn't have any kind of factual store or database of information. It's just predicting what the correct thing is. So it might not catch it. Might do, but it might not. And the other thing you can do is, as part of the self-checking, is you can kind of prompt it to say, well, only answer if you're 100% certain. And it might say, it's this, but it's, maybe it's debated or it's not sure. And so you can help catch it. Now, what I mentioned on LLMs and AI agents, is that a lot of AI agents do have some form of self-check mechanism already built in. So for example, we have our little AI agent here. And what we're saying is, I check my own work, and when I see a mistake, I try and fix it. So for example, if you've ever used an AI coding tool such as Cursor, you might have it, or maybe say Lovable. You might have the AI go and create code, and then it has an error, and the code doesn't work. And then you have to click fix my error, like debug or whatever the button says. And then it's going to go and try and fix the issue that it created itself. And so now it's going reprompting, going, okay, this is incorrect. What might be wrong? And it's going to go and say, based on the probability, maybe this is wrong and maybe this is wrong. And it's going to go and try and change things and try and fix it. And then maybe that works, or maybe it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is it's subject to the same limitations as before. So that is way number 2. Number 3 is overall, you can just limit the scope of what the AI or the LLM has to do, what you're asking it to do. Because if you make, if you're giving it a really big scope, the chance of it to make an error is just going to be much larger. If you're asking it to do something very small, very niche, very particular, is a better chance that you're going to have it correctly recall the information. In terms of, if I ask it a very specific question, chances are in its training data, it probably has answers to very specific questions, which is then going to go and come back with, hopefully, a more correct answer. Again, still subject to the same limitations, but the chance of it performing better is higher. A great example of where this doesn't actually work out is, for example, if you go to ChatGPT and you ask ChatGPT to generate you a watch face, like show me a clock and make the time 3:15, for example. It's probably going to struggle to do that because nearly every image of a watch or a clock online normally show 10 past 10, if I remember correctly. Maybe 10 to 2. But there's always the same hand position on clocks in images. because it showcases the clock the best. But then because that's somewhat, I'll call it polluted in its training data, it really struggles to show clock times at the time you want it to, because all of its training data, and so probabilistically, the best or most likely outcome is going to be the one it sees the pattern in the most, which is 10 past 2. I don't think it is 10 past 2. I just can't remember what it is, though. So I'm going to say it's 10 past 2, which is interesting, right? So that's how you can somewhat prevent hallucinations the best. But overall, the end and base reality is you're going to either need to check with human in the loop, which basically means a human needs to go and check the work and make sure that it's good, or you're going to need to accept a small chance of there being errors. Which is best? It depends entirely on you and your use case. If, for example, you're using it for work and you want it to create a presentation, check it. If, for example, you want some kind of full automation, let's say you're making a simple automation that when you have someone fill in a contact form on your website, it can take that information, summarize it, and then send a message in Slack. For example, we have a very similar automation for ourselves. And probably 999 times out of 1,000, it's correct, but very occasionally it creates a not very good summary. Now, is that a problem? Not really, because we just use that information for us to be aware of who's contacted us, and then we'll go into their contact and we'll then read the actual information. So in that case, it's not a problem. Or for example, another one of our clients, we use AI to find and match similar images for interior design. And because we're presenting, let's say, 100 search results for images, it actually doesn't matter if one or two of them are incorrect, because we can just go and we're going to be able to, you just ignore the one or two that are incorrect, and you're looking at the other 98 and you're selecting the one that you want. And so 2 options: check with a human in the loop or accept a small chance of errors. Now, hopefully this answers some of your questions about what is a hallucination, why do they occur, and how do you prevent them. If you have any other questions at all, please leave a comment below. I'll do my best to answer. And otherwise, thank you. For more information, resources, and videos on these kind of topics, you can check out more videos on the channel or read the description below, and you'll get links to other resources, as well as the 7 Signal website, where you can learn more about us, what we do, and potentially how we can help you with your AI. Thanks.